The music of contemporary Estonian composer Arvo Pärt is most often described as part of an offshoot of minimalism known as holy minimalism. Pärt's music uses a technique of his own devising called Tintinnabuli, which comes from a word that refers to the ringing of bells. He came up with this in the mid-1970s. 1976 is the usual date given, and it's super simple, almost annoyingly so. Throughout the 1960s, Pärt wrote in a high modernist style, culminating in 1968's Credo that earned the ire of the Soviet Union. The resulting creative exile, during which he turned to medieval poetry and early music, resulted in a newfound appreciation for simplicity. A simplicity born from his Orthodox faith that is just now getting the serious scholarly and analytical attention that it so richly deserves. Tintinnabuli combines two lines in a very particular way. Each voice uses, at its basis, a familiar musical building block, the scale and the triad. In its most basic format, the melody, or M voice, which moves almost always by step, is paired with a tintinnabulating, or T voice, which solely uses notes from a predetermined triad in a set relationship to the M voice. Let's say you're working in D major. Say I have a D major scale, and that's my melodic material. We're going to keep it easy and use a D major triad as the T voice. All Pärt has to do at this point is come up with a melody, then figure out the rules of how the notes of the triad are related to the notes of the scale. Let's say the T voice is always going to be above the M voice, and let's say that's going to be the next note of the chord up. For melodic notes D and E, the T voice will be on F sharp, the first note of the triad up from those notes that is not one of those notes. Can't harmonize it with itself. For the F sharp and G, that's harmonized with the A. For A, B, and C sharp, that's harmonized with this D. Each note in the M voice is paired with a note from the T voice. So let's hear how this sounds. When used over long stretches of a piece, especially for resonant instruments like the piano, you get this carefully controlled sounding of pitches that all come from a single chord, following the melody around like, I don't know, a ghost or something. It infuses consonance into the very DNA of a composition, while still giving Pärt fine control over dissonances, and potentially very harsh ones at that. If a note of the M voice happens to be a half step away from the next T voice note up, and you're using the first note up rule, you're going to get a minor second. But you're also going to get a lot of thirds, fourths, fifths, and sixths no matter what you're doing. Okay, let's do another. This time B minor, sticking with the same key signature, but instead of going to the next note up, we're going to try two notes down. B, A, and G skip over the F sharp to the D, F sharp and E skip over the D to the B, and D and C sharp down to the F sharp below that. Same principle, we're just changing two parameters, the directionality and the distance between the voices. Pärt also uses an alternating technique where he'll reverse the polarity for every note. If we do that to our first example, you'll get this. Pärt uses this pretty frequently to add more complexity to his textures. To him, tintinnabulation is a metaphor. The melodic voice represents a state of imperfection and sin, the triad a state of perfection and grace. There's a reason he's called a holy minimalist after all. Do these triads and scales have to line up? Many times they do, but they don't have to. In the fifth of his Magnificat antiphons, Pärt uses melodic G naturals. The Tintinnabulation uses G sharps, and this generates some pretty crunchy cross relations. Does the triad have to come from the same tonality as the scale? No, you can have a melody in one key and tintinnabulate another. Nothing's stopping you from that. Does it always have to be a major or minor chord? Almost always for Pärt. There's a certain purity to the sound of a triad that Pärt has talked about quite a bit. But there are contexts in which he'll use a diminished or dominant seventh instead, especially when he's trying to evoke the fallen and sinful nature of this world. And the fact that the technique pairs one voice with another does not mean that he sounds both of them at the same time. The T voice can be delayed from the M voice, resulting in new harmonic possibilities, as in Da Pacem Domine. Pärt takes a simple idea and multiplies it, overlays it on itself to get greater and greater degrees of complexity of texture without destroying the technique's ingrained harmonic simplicity. The reversible nature of this technique, that is, T voices that can exist on either side of an M voice, leads to a lot of large-scale harmonic symmetry. Overlaying T voices in sequence gives you arpeggiations in a mid-20th century minimalist vein, while block chords assembled using these techniques sound like they come from the late Middle Ages. Overlaying different M voices at different rates, each with its own T voice, gets you one of his most famous pieces, the Cantus in Memoriam Benjamin Britten. Now, the name is not exactly literal. Pärt has cautioned against viewing tintinnabulation as a literal imitation of bells, which tracks because bells don't actually show up a lot in Pärt's work. Unlike a vibrating string from which a major triad can be generated, bells, and especially those from the tradition with which Pärt is most familiar, just don't have that. Their overtones look totally wacky if you analyze them. Tintinnabulation gives Pärt a reason to use consonants in a thoroughly modern and personal style, which has led to much popular success in the contemporary classical field, often defined by a search for new sounds and novel textures. In a world of dissonance and complexity, it's kind of refreshing to know that it's still possible to recombine some of the oldest, most basic elements of music into something entirely new. Music of constant change on the one hand, but complete stasis on the other.